Desde APLA creemos que generar espacios de debate es generar transformación. Te invitamos a nuestro primer encuentro virtual de sostenibilidad. Desde APLA creemos que generar espacios de debate es generar transformación. Te invitamos a nuestro primer encuentro virtual de sostenibilidad.
Hola a todos, muy bienvenidos. Bueno, estamos con la sesión de huella de carbono en el transporte marítimo y terrestre. Hoy vamos a estar con Jack Power. Me voy a pasar a inglés para dar la bienvenida a Jack. Jack, welcome to this session. Thank you very much to join us and participate. I'm going to start to share your presentation now, Jack.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. So, hola. Apologies, my Spanish isn't of a level that is great for this presentation, but I hope that I'll speak slowly, and I promise to try and keep to time. So first of all, thank you to APLA again for giving me this opportunity to talk about the shipping's road to decarbonisation. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jack Power. I'm the Executive Director and Head of EMEA Sales for the Maritime and Trade Division of IHS Markit, and also the Poseidon and Sea Cargo Charter Reporting Lead. For those of you that don't know IHS Markit, we are a global financial and maritime information business, and I work within the transportation division, of which we are focused predominantly and solely on maritime. And so today, today's presentation really is entitled, very topical in terms of the environment and shipping, is entitled Shipping's Road to Decarbonisation Starts with Visibility. So if we can go to the next slide, please. There we go. And so the agenda I've laid out today, essentially, we're going to cover some of the big headlines that have been in the news around the decarbonisation effort as it relates to shipping, where we are now, so shipping's emissions right now, what the challenge is and where we are on that scale of decarbonising, some of the global and European big targets that have been set by the major governments and regulators in this space, some of the global and European Union initiatives that have been put in place to try and reduce that emissions and accelerate that progress. And then importantly, in my role, facing off with some of the largest charterers, logistics companies and carriers in the world, how the industry has reacted to the scale of the challenge of decarbonisation, namely with two initiatives we're helping with in terms of visibility, the Poseidon Principles and the Sea Cargo Charter. We'll move on to just cover a few of our partners that I can talk to in terms of helping them with their emissions visibility. I'll talk to you very briefly about our platform and data. And then we can, the last point really is just to talk about some other topics that have been looked at and other areas that we can, as an industry, look at to move faster and help meet and exceed that goal of decarbonisation in shipping. Hopefully there'll be some time for questions and answers as well. And I understand these will come through on the side panel. Great. So next slide, please. Wonderful. So I, in my best kind of clip art fashion, I really had a plethora to choose from, but essentially I wanted to just highlight the scale of the challenge. I mean, two topics have obviously been of very high profile in shipping, obviously the supply chain challenges we face there, but none other as well than the decarbonisation and the carbon neutral efforts in the shipping industry. So, I mean, here we've really just got a smorgasbord of some of the journals, some of the publications that have talked about that challenge. And what I wanted to point out here really was, this is obviously with the latest report coming out on off of the Paris Agreement, where we're, you know, on track. We're not on track to meet that 1.5 Celsius reduction in overall temperature heating on the globe. You know, that challenge, how it trickles down to shipping, is something that is not just being covered by, you know, us as an industry in terms of publications. It's also being looked at across the board. So this is something which is, you know, a global challenge. Shipping, which we'll come on to, obviously tips quite a lot into that global emissions figure. And it's something that everybody is interested in and everybody is looking at. I mean, you know, one headline I loved here was obviously from Shreya Shipokati at Citigroup, talking about his obligation in ship finance as a ship lender. You know, we have a gun to our head right now. Quite dramatic, but actually, you know, really that talks to how pressing this challenge is. So shipping emissions in the headline, big. Shipping emissions in the headline, just as big. Next slide, please. Great. So, so shipping emissions. So where are we now? So I wanted to just give a quick kind of outline for people in terms of shipping's contribution to emissions in some of the key numbers that I pulled out. The main number really is the overall contribution of shipping to global emissions. So this is taken from the most recent 4th International Maritime Organization greenhouse gas study. And shipping, unfortunately, the share of shipping emissions in terms of the global emissions has increased from just from 2.76 right up to 2.89%. So there has been an increase in that overall figure, unfortunately. In terms of a European aspect to it, I pulled this out from the European Union. Over 13% of the GHG gases from the transport sector are coming from shipping emissions. And unfortunately, the total greenhouse gas emissions from maritime shipping rose about 10% from 2012 to 2018. In addition to that, something else that is outside of emissions was actually the increase in black carbon and methane, something we call the short-lived climate pollutants. So unfortunately that respectively has gone up from 12 and 150%. So the key point really around some of these short-lived climate pollutants outside of, you know, in terms of overall emissions, is they actually, methane, for example, is 86 times more effective at trapping heat in the atmosphere than the same amount of CO2 over a 20-year time period. So that's something that is that's quite topical, because there's a trend to move to LNG in the shipping industry as well, and then there's some parties talking about the methane leakage that comes from LNG as a fuel source. So that's gone up. Not all bad news. I'll leave with some good news. You know, the actual carbon intensity of each vessel between 2012 and 2018 for international shipping has improved. So that's been great. So what are the big industry in shipping? What are the big global and European targets that have been set? Most of you will be aware of the International Maritime Organization. Back in 2018, much to everybody's satisfaction, they laid out their initial strategy. And that strategy was to reduce total greenhouse gas emissions by over 50% by 2050, and reduce carbon emissions intensity, so the intensity of those vessels, by 40% in 2030 and 70% by 2050 in comparison to 2008 levels. Now, outside of the IMO, which is the main body that represents shipping, we also have the European Union, who've been quite aggressive and vocal in this space of accelerating that reduction in carbon themselves. And it really, in the last couple of weeks, you will have probably seen some headlines about the Fit for 55 strategy. And the big news there really is that, the EU wants to have a 55% reduction of emissions by 2030 and be climate neutral by 2050. And in the last few weeks, they have included shipping emissions from international shipping, calling it EU ports, in that target. So those are the big goals that we need to reach in terms of emission reduction targets. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So this is Lord Kelvin. He's a UK mathematician, most famous for the Kelvin scale of temperature measurement. And I took a quote there, really, there's many, but this one I liked, which really was, if you can't measure these emissions, then you cannot improve it. And that certainly has been the approach. This is something that shipping probably didn't look at for many years up to this point. But much like everybody across the globe now, the challenge to reduce carbon emissions is not unique to shipping. And shipping has recognized that and put in a lot of practical measures to start that measurement process, because that's where you start. So if we move on to some of those initiatives, next slide. Yeah, so we just move on to some of the big global and EU initiatives to reduce shipping emissions. Now, a lot of people are calling this, the alphabet soup of of different practical measures, and it is something to keep up with. But practically speaking, there's a bunch of measures really that are around collection, measurement of data, and some other initiatives that really revolve around improvements in the fleet and measuring the improvements in the fleet and improvements in how you operate that fleet. So I'll quickly run through them. The first is the European Union monitoring, reporting and verification, so the EU Mrv scheme. So the EU have been responsive. From January 2018, they have basically mandated that large ships over 5,000 gross tonnage, either loading or unloading cargo in the EEA, so the European Economic Area, are basically have to monitor and report the related CO2 emissions of those voyages. That's also that's at an EU level. At a global level, the IMO has recognised the need to start collecting and looking at this data and to see whether there's improvements, and they've mandated something called the IMO DCS scheme, the data collection scheme. So again, that is anyone over 5,000 gross tons that's engaged in international shipping. They need to report that fuel consumption of the ships to each flag state of those ships. The flag state then reports that annualized aggregated data in a secure database just to the IMO, and it's the IMO who will look at that from an annual summary report to the Marine Environment Protection Committee, the MEPC. And so they're going to look at that data and say, how are we doing? What's it looking like as a global fleet? So those are some of the big collection schemes that are ongoing. In terms of measures that some of the governments have taken to try and accelerate that. This is really quite recent. You will have read in the last couple of weeks that the European Union has included shipping into their emissions trading scheme. So from 2023, 20% of the shipping emissions by international voyages into EU ports will be included in this cap and trade carbon trading scheme. And the practice there is, by 2026, we'll see that ratchet up to 100%. So essentially using, the targets will be set, and should you exceed them or be below them, then you're obviously involved in that cap and trade carbon trading scheme. So outside of that, some of the big mandates that have been put in by regulators and governments really around the IMO. So the first one, which has been in existence since 2011, has been the Energy Efficiency Design Index. So this is really saying that any ships that now are built and the keel is laid and they go into service, they have to meet this EEDI. So since 2011, the IMO is basically saying we need a minimum energy efficiency level per capacity mile for all the different ship sizes and ship segments. In addition to that, what has also been brought in for the existing fleet and based on that design index is to say that from, I think, 2023, based on EEDI, the existing ships are going to start to have to meet a required standardized energy efficiency level based on the engine power and the capacity and speed. So all that existing fleet is going to need to start cleaning itself up from a technical perspective. And then you may have heard of something called carbon intensity. So this is basically an operational efficiency measure, and it's using a couple of different ways to measure that we'll come on to later. But from 2023, any vessels that are over kind of 5,000 gross tons, they're going to need to meet a kind of A to E rating. So much like we have the ATE efficiency on electrical appliances, your air conditioning, your fridges, that's going to also come into place in the shipping industry. And so it will mean that you have to calculate the annual reduction factor you need to ensure that the carbon intensity of that ship is improving. And you're going to get an A to E rating. And the vessels that consistently score a D rating over 3 years, they're going to have to start submitting correctional factors or face the consequences on that. So really, that's a very brief summarization of some of I think are the main metrics that have been put in place to try and reduce carbon from the governments and regulators. But what does the industry think about that? Can you guys still hear me? Because I seem to be frozen. You can still hear me? Yeah, good. Okay. So next slide. Yeah, so I titled this one "The Industry Reacts," and I'll come on to it at the end. I think there's I think the main thing to say is that the embracing of the challenge to decarbonize is something that the industry has really reacted to and is embracing, and we'll see that a bit later. But the two main initiatives that we've been working on with the industry are the Sea Cargo Charter, not exclusively, but the Sea Cargo Charter and the Poseidon Principles. And both of these are solely industry-led initiatives with the Global Maritime Forum and shipping experts to create a standardized measure of measuring emissions. And they essentially take two very key segments of the industry that are related to shipping emissions and have an impact: ship finance and charterers, the largest charterers in the world. And they've created two initiatives, one called the Poseidon Principles, which is the ship finance initiative, and the other called the Sea Cargo Charter, which, broadly speaking, is the world's largest ship finance banks. They represent about 150 billion of ship finance. Around a third of all global ship finance are signed up to this. And some of the biggest charterers in the world, they've all signed up to a framework which essentially commits them to disclose on an annual basis the impact they are having with relations to their carbon emissions, either on the portfolio they lend to or the transport work they perform. There's a couple of little points on that, really. The two, the Poseidon Principles is looking at it from an asset level. So each of these vessels that we lend, that we provide lending and capital to, how is that asset performing, each ship type, each category type? So they're using something called the annual efficiency ratio. And the Sea Cargo Charter is using something called the energy efficiency operational ratio, the EEOI. And that's essentially saying that also takes into account the amount of cargo that's on the vessel. So we are moving cargo, we have an impact. How is our impact prescribed? So what's really impressive about these are two, initiatives that were spun up in the last couple of years. And they're really, quite encouraging that the industry has said, hey, look, the very first thing we need to do is start measuring and start being accountable for what we're contributing to. So that's been a big reaction. And we have been helping in that space. If I move on to the next slide. Yeah, so we've been helping in that space in terms of, as an independent data company in the maritime space and a leading provider of enterprise data software, we've been helping these organizations with the challenge of processing a huge swathe of data, independently verifying it, and having a data set that they can compare to and look at and verify, and giving them the transparency and the visibility across their fleet. So these are some of the clients, not exclusively to do with the Sea Cargo Charter, but Shell, ADM, Trafigura. And so we're essentially helping them gather all of that data from the vessels they charter and essentially apply an independent way to, an independent way to verify that, and then a very succinct and easy way to report that across their organization, but also across customers within their supply chain. And I've also put in here DB Schenker, a big logistics company who we've been working closely with. Obviously, the demand on that side of the shipping industry, as their customers look to say, hey, what are you doing about showing me the most carbon efficient route, the route that has the least amount of carbon emissions? Can you show me options? So we've been providing those building blocks on those routes and the carbon emissions that they produce. So we're really proud to partner with these organizations. I think they recognize, from a perspective of the challenge, is having someone outside of their organization that's independent and a third party, and being able to see that in a uniform view has been really important to them. And that's something IHS Markit done for a while. So if I quickly go on to the next slide. Yeah, okay, so this is a very quick screenshot. So this, I've anonymized some of this, but what you can really see on this slide is essentially a view from the Sea Cargo Charter, essentially. And you can see here on every single vessel level, I haven't put the vessel names in there, but you can see where the data's been measured, where it's been estimated, and then really importantly, the amount of transport work that that vessel has done and what that impact has been in terms of carbon emissions. So that's across the total fleet that charterer is responsible for. And this is just one of the dashboards that we use to be able to take in all that data, verify it, validate it, check it, but importantly, able to report it. So our job, we see, is giving more visibility, giving more independence, and giving the kind of speed and efficiency to get that data out so people can see the impact and see it quickly and easily. And we've been doing that for some years. We obviously have a leading maritime expertise. We work with the IMO to issue the IMO number for the vessels. So we have a very respected reputation in terms of independent data. And the great thing for us is we have these very industrial type software tools that mean collecting, which is a challenge, and validating is really very straightforward for us. Okay, next slide. Okay, and so I've kind of titled this last slide, moving faster to meet and exceed the goal. So I think the industry, there's a few things here. I think one is obviously the regulatory bodies and the governments are reacting as fast as they can. Sometimes it's felt that maybe the IMO can be moving even faster. Certainly that's been the voice that's vocal from the EU. The industry have really, really embraced this. They wanted to get ahead of it. They wanted to create these initiatives to declare and be transparent about their emissions. And I think that one of, that's the kind of first road. I think another part where the industry will really benefit is is creating some sort of consensus emissions data as well. So as we start to gather this data, what does good look like? Where are we now as a total universe of either charterers or banks within the industry? And what does that look like in comparison with the average? So, I think we're seeing those first steps. We're seeing people gather information on their fleet. We're seeing them compare that information to some of the big studies, the EU reported data I talked about, the greenhouse, the fourth greenhouse gas studies and the trajectories there. Maybe the next step maybe is also looking as an industry how we're doing against consensus. What are the consensus on different ship types and categories? What does good look like for certain trading lanes, certain routes? So I think that's going to be very interesting as we go by voyage or vessel by vessel. And then I think what's really coming, this is a data challenge. So, we're going to see deeper insight and analytics. And really, when I'm speaking to my customers, they're saying, hey, we're gathering this data and that's the challenge. We're starting to look at it. How do we compare? How do we compare to the studies? And now what's the impact we're having when we're making changes? So either operationally, what's the impact of the changes we're making? So, technical measures like propeller cleaning, propeller polishing, tank cleaning, or operational measures like adjustment of speed, like taking more weather efficient routes. What does that mean if I do X, Y, or Z? How does that impact my fleet? How does that impact my emissions? That's definitely something we're being asked. We're working with many customers on. And that includes things like the move to alternative fuels, so biofuels. What's the impact there on biofuels? And then outside of that, I think, this is another industry-led initiative. One of the big voices in this space has been Trafigura, is the drive, I think, or the demand for a carbon levy on fuel. So I think everyone recognizes a move to alternative fuels and, wind assisted measures and different technical improvements are important, but fuels, different types of fuels, less carbon intense fuels are going to be a big part of that story. And unless there's a way to kind of uniformly help people make that investment and have a fund that invests in that, that could be a struggle. And so there's talk of a carbon levy and that levy and the funds raised in that levy being used to accelerate that move into alternative fuels. And that's certainly something, as we look at the carbon emissions, we're working out what the carbon levy might be, what the carbon offsets are. And these are things that I think the industry are really, impressively in shipping are moving forward with at speed and at pace. So I know I didn't have a great deal of time. I wanted to try and give a very high level of some of the big measures and what we're doing in this space. And hopefully you found that informative and hopefully you found that enjoyable. If there are any questions now, I will take them. Right, Anton. Wonderful.